Hello, everybody. Welcome back, or welcome to Recovering Out Loud podcast, the podcast where we get real about addiction and recovery. Today, Rob L. joins us in studio to share a deeply personal and powerful perspective, what it's like to walk the path of recovery when you're not the addict, but the father of two daughters who are. Coming from a culture where alcohol was always present, Rob was no stranger to substance use, but everything changed when both of his girls began struggling with addiction. One daughter is now in strong recovery, the other is still trying to go it alone. In this episode, Rob opens up about the heartbreak, the helplessness, and ultimately the healing he found in his own recovery journey as a support person. We discuss the emotional toll of loving someone through addiction, what boundaries and support really look like, and how recovery can reshape the lives of those on the sidelines. I learned a lot today, and I hope you do too. Enjoy the show. If you or someone you know is struggling with a loved one in addiction, please reach out for help. Send me a message and I can connect you with someone who may help. Rob, I appreciate you coming down, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
We've been in contact for a while now.
Yes.
You're a friend of my mom's. My mom introduced me to you, and she says nothing but good things about you.
It's very kind.
I appreciate that. You've been listening and sending me messages as well, saying that you appreciate the content. That means a lot to me. When anyone messages us, no matter what it is, the fact that it kind of touched you in some way, I appreciate that, because that's why I wanted to start to do this thing. And, those messages go a long way. So thank you. I also too, I really wanted to, I think this, loved one, the loved ones of addicts are an important voice. I want them to be an important voice in this podcast. It doesn't get talked about enough, right? So we were at a wedding last night, my wife and I, and it was a good friend of mine. And one of my buddies, we were talking about it at the table, and this podcast came up. And it's funny, I'm at a point right now, I don't know about you, but I'm getting better at it. I have a hard time taking compliments and taking good words about me. And that's something about my self-worth. I'm still healing from, hating myself for so long. I'm getting a lot better at it now, where I can just kind of like listen to what somebody says, and instead of get like uncomfortable, like I'm not, he's wrong, I'm not a good person, right? This kind of uncomfortability, I just accept it, and I'm grateful for it today, right? So last night we started talking about it, and addiction at a wedding dinner table is not the most comfortable subject to talk about. For me, I'm okay because I can talk about it. I've started doing this. I enjoy talking about it, right? But there's like 3 or 4 strangers at the table, and I'm like, what must they be thinking about this conversation, right? We started talking about some pretty heavy stuff, right? And right. I really want to get your opinion on this, and we'll jump into it. But my friend, one of my really good buddies, and I'm so grateful for this, he looked at my wife and he kind of said, "How are you doing? How are you?" And I find that gets missed a lot in this conversation. We don't really realize how much addiction touches the loved ones, and this kind of vicious, precarious, butterfly effect that addiction has on. And so I was thinking about it this morning. I kind of drew it out in my notes. If there's one addict and there's 3 loved ones of that addict that are suffering, you don't think about this as much as maybe we should, but if there's even just, let's just say 3 more people that love that loved one of the addict, now that's 12 people thinking about the addict, right? Because it's this kind of like spider web, this kind of like trickle down effect. So now you have 3 loved ones worried about the addict, and you have, let's just say 3 loved ones of that loved one worried about the loved one. It's pretty, it's pretty intense, right?
Yeah, there's a lot to take from that. It's the way that you just described that kind of reminded me of, you're probably too young to remember this, but there was a shampoo ad when I was a kid that it had a woman talking about this product that she was using, and then I told 2 friends, and then they told 2 friends, and then they told 2 friends, and so on and so on. Yeah. And it was like the screen kept splitting to more and more people in like little boxes, you know, like the Hollywood Squares or something like that. So it's, you know, you make a really good point. It is something that, you know, and we're all hopefully lucky to have people in our lives that care about us, right? And when you are lucky enough to be surrounded by people who care about you, those things which are causing you the most consternation and the most trauma, oftentimes, for better or for worse, become the prevalent topic of conversation every time that you see one another, right? So many times the first question will be, so how's your daughter?
Yeah.
Right.
How,
you know, so how are you? And I think it's a natural thing because people who love you just want you to be okay. But yes, to your point, I think that oftentimes, and we were talking about this a little bit before, you know, we turned on the equipment, that the person who is, you know, in active addiction, the person who is experiencing the trauma that they are, their issue feels more immediate. It feels more real. It feels more like a clear and present danger, right? Whereas the person, the support network, the loved one, it feels kind of secondary. Yeah. But oftentimes, people like that are suffering in silence, right? And then the question becomes out of that is, how are you going to deal with it?
Yeah.
Right? Because on my road, I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, you know, and in some ways I'm glad for that. Because the clear path was brought to me. And in other ways, I still carry some baggage with it, right? That I'm like, oh man, what was I thinking? That I dealt with this by doing X, Y, Z. Yeah. You know, like rookie move, dude. Yeah.
So you have 2 daughters.
Yes.
One is currently in active addiction, in the throes of active addiction, and one is in recovery, right?
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about your story and get into that a little?
How far back do you want me to go?
As far back as you want to today, I would say. Like what, you know, maybe I'll just, whatever you think is prevalent. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess for myself, I grew up in a household, where, alcohol was just sort of accepted as a constant presence. The same way that like milk or bread or, you know, anything else was. I don't ever want to give the impression that my folks abused it, but my father was a Scottish immigrant. My mother was from Northern Ontario, but came from Irish stock. So Scottish and Irish, insert joke here, you know, about whiskey and, you know, Guinness and beer and, you know, everything in between. So, you know, my folks were very hard workers, but on the weekends, you know, when Saturday night came, they, you know, really enjoyed a few.
Yeah.
So, you know, alcohol to me was something that I just kind of accepted. And it's funny because, you know, I was thinking about this when we set up our session here. When I hit my teenage years, as all kids do, and I started fooling around with things that, you know, the law said I wasn't yet ready. Yeah. And, you know, and also at the time, you know, things that were not legal, right? Like, you know, so obviously I'm talking about alcohol, weed, and, you know, this is like late 80s that we're talking, that I sort of came of age. So hash, mushrooms, acid, little bit of cocaine. And whenever I got pinched and I was very obviously drunk, oftentimes it was dad, you know, he was just like, he's just blowing off steam. It's fine. When it was something else, do you know how much you're going to ruin your life?
Yeah.
You know?
Interesting.
Yeah. Because but it was just wasn't part of their world, right? You know, drugs was something that had to do with the counterculture and, you know, dirty hippies and, you know, stuff like that. So I I got all of that out of my system. I'm not going to say that when like I'm at a concert or a sporting event or a club or something like that, that I don't drink, because I do. But it also doesn't have the same end result on me as what it does on people that I care about. Yeah. Right. Alcohol, and, you know, other substances they were never, you know, particularly prevalent in my relationship with my children as they were growing up. I'm divorced, and, you know, my ex-wife's family is Italian. So, you know, wine was always a very big deal. Like even just like with a daily, like a Wednesday night meal, right? Not irresponsibly, just present. Yeah. So I couldn't say how that really affected, the sort of acceptance of alcohol in my kids' lives. I think that, you know, like that's their story, right? But I think, so I guess this would probably be like if I had to, on the roadmap of where we've come to this point, if I had to like define an exact moment, and I'm going to talk broadly just because I'm not sure that I completely understand what potential legal ramifications there could be in this, but my kids were involved in a very, very bad accident when they were teenagers. And they, as a result, received a lot of money, which was put into their hands right after they had both turned 18 years old. Mm-hmm. Being 18 years old, that means I have no legal recourse by which that I can instruct them, right? Now, I don't know about you, but when you were 18 years old, if you were handed $250,000, I don't really need to finish this sentence, right?
As you're talking, I'm thinking about all the stuff that I would do at 18, and none of it is responsible.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow. So that was really sort of like, I think that was putting propane on the barbecue right there, right? I had noticed with my youngest that there were already some issues at that point, that were a little outside of what would be normal teenage angst. My oldest, she, like, it was always like school, boys, you know, do I have the coolest pair of Uggs? Like normal stuff, right? Yeah. Whatever normal means. But I don't know that I can necessarily put a defining point on it, but I noticed that with my youngest, there was something, deeper and more profound and, you know, dare I say darker, that was going on with her. I still don't, you know, really understand what that is, but again, that would be her story. And so, you know, that influx, you know, this massively lucrative influx of money really, you know, helped to fuel where things went. Now my oldest, she had taken some advice, I believe it was from her mom, and she had said, you shouldn't take some of that money and put it in real estate. You know, good idea. Yeah. Good idea, right? It's the only thing that there's never going to be more of. And so she bought a condo downtown. And the thing is that I believe she was 19 when she got it, right? Imagine being 19 years old and owning like a prime real estate, you know? And
downtown Toronto. Too.
Yeah, downtown Toronto, you know, burgeoning neighborhood.
It's the mecca of, you know, use and alcohol.
Yeah. So what happened was, because she was young, because she had no existing credit profile, she had said, will you co-sign for me? Right? Now, I had no reason to think that, like, this seemed like money in the bank as far as she was concerned, that I was just helping her out with, building something at a really young age. And she had a serious leg up on where like 99% of the rest of the population would not.
Yeah.
And then probably about, my timelines are a little fuzzy, but about 2 years later, this was during lockdown, which, as you know, probably exasperated a lot of people's tolerance.
Yeah. And mental health in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right.
I had left my job at the time. I had found myself in a pretty good position in many different ways, like, financially, mentally, emotionally. And I was like, you know what? Considering that the world is shutting down, I'm actually going to kind of try to make lemonade out of lemons. And I left my job for a year, and I wrote a novel during that time.
Wow.
Now, there's something very almost like a movie moment here, where the Friday afternoon that I had finished, that I had written the end, I came bounding down the stairs, excited beyond all get out. The world is my oyster. I can go anywhere from here. There's a knock on the door, right? I get served with papers that the mortgage has been defaulted on, that I had co-signed for, that I owned, 0.5% of.
Yeah.
So that was when I came to the realization, fuck. Like, things have gone seriously wrong under my nose. So that was sort of like the pinpoint defining moment.
Had you had like hints along the way, or was this a complete shock? Yeah.
Yes. But I always thought that, there was a level of, maybe common sense and sensibility that existed there, that she wouldn't get pulled into this. Right. But, as we both know, it isn't necessarily always about common sense and sensibility.
Yeah.
There's something, deeper that always goes on there. Yeah. Right. And so I think maybe a month or two after that had happened, the timing on that is something that I always look back on as being like disturbingly profound, right? Sure. Like, it's like I was at a moment of, incredible creative high. I had also been fortunate enough that I, had just bought my dream car as well too. And it was like everything was just lining up so fabulously, right? And I'm not saying that, to make anybody involved feel worse as a result, maybe just to kind of illustrate the point of exactly where I was at that point in my life. But so maybe, a month or two after that, I had received a phone call one morning from the police that she had taken a serious beating from a guy that was in her life at the time, who had kind of introduced her to the world of hard, dangerous narcotics. Yeah. And that she was in a detox facility. She was in treatment. And so, she got in touch while she was there and said, can you come and pick me up on Saturday after I'm fully detoxed, So that's my oldest daughter's story, and that was brutal, man. That was brutal. That Saturday that I went downtown to go pick her up, and she came out, you know, through the front door, and she was, you know, attended by one of the people who worked there. I looked at this, like, just emaciated rake of a child, you know, face just black and blue, you know, and I'm like, who did this to you? You know, like, your first instinct is just like, I want to kill everybody that you have had any contact with over the course of the last year and a half, you know, something like that. Yeah, but, you know, that was an eye opener, man. That was an eye opener. So that's my oldest story. And with one exception, she has trod the road of, you know, sobriety and recovery. And, you know, in many ways, this kid's my hero.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. So, my youngest, I have less clarity on how that went. I know that there was always a propensity with her, for whatever reason. And again, I wouldn't ever want to try and dissect it because it's not my story. But there's always been a tendency to maybe surround herself with people who I suspect deep down she knows are not good for her. And if I were to offer a theory, I would say that when you allow yourself to be attended by people who you perhaps know are not good for you, it gives you an excuse to behave in a way that is destructive, that is not good for you. Right?
Yeah. It kind of, and I can relate to that a lot. I hung out with, you know, in one of our literatures that we work with, it talks about this idea of lower companions. And what I've learned from my perspective is you nailed it on the head. It's like, I used to hang out with these people that were quote unquote worse than I was, doing worse than I was. And I always had this, you know, in addiction, we do this comparison thing where it's like, well, I'm not as bad as him. I'm not doing heroin yet. I'm not using needles yet. I'm not smoking meth yet. I'm only snorting meth. And it kind of it fuels this. It's okay, buddy. Like, you're okay. You're not that bad. Right. So yeah.
Yeah. That's, that is a dangerous graph to find yourself, trying to navigate, you know, related, but perhaps opposite. You know, one of the things that I had an epiphany about, in my own recovery and in my own program is, there is no point system with us, right? You know, that it's like the absolute ego to sit in a room with other people, you know, who are all suffering their own traumas and say, yeah, but my trauma is worse than yours. You know, like it's not about that.
No, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And what may seem like nothing to somebody is the end of the world to somebody else, right?
Yeah. All
of our lives are tweaked a little bit differently, and we are shaped by experiences that are unique, right? So going back to my youngest, I think there was, you know, she has gone up and down, struggled. There was an incident where she was missing for a long weekend. A couple of years ago, it was Labor Day weekend. And, you know, her phone was off. Her mom had a key to her apartment, which was only a few blocks away. And, like her bank card had been left behind, and, you know, anything that would have given her any sort of connection to resource. Her cell phone was gone though. So that was maybe a good sign, but it wasn't on. There was a huge search by the police. Eventually, you know, she was found. She was okay, a little worse for wear. I don't entirely know what happened over the course of that long weekend. I don't know that I want to know.
Yeah.
In fact, it's probably best that I don't. But there were some serious hard conversations after the fact. And it was like, look, we'll figure this out piece by piece.
Yeah.
We're going to get you, cleaned up. We'll take it from there. Right. So she ended up going to rehab. We sent her to what seemed to be a fantastic rehab out on the East Coast, because, as I'm sure that you know, rehabs here are pretty overtaxed,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's hard. Not to make it about money, but, not everybody can afford, some of the resources that are available here, myself included. Like, some of them are pretty steep, right?
Yeah.
So she came back. The rehab didn't take, for whatever reason. Again, that's her story. We had hit a point where it was like, you're living with us now. Your behaviors haven't changed. I can see that you're on a bad slope. And this is also one of the things that I have learned as time has gone on, about acceptance and dealing with it is, I'm always here for you, right? I am totally team you 100% of the way, but I don't have the strength that I can watch you do this to yourself.
Absolutely.
Right. And so the response to that was to kind of disappear again, go on a bender. And long story short, there was an overdose. And she, over Christmas a couple of years ago, was in a coma for 5 weeks. That was easily, and this includes, the death of people that I have lost around me through my life, including my folks and a brother-in-law and, and other people that, that was like sorry, man, that was the worst period of my life. Yeah. But, there was a little bit of a miracle in that she woke up on Christmas morning.
Wow.
And I said to her, like, you know what day it is today, and she had been intubated, so very raspy and, and could only speak like in kind of like a growly whisper, but, she was like, it's Christmas, Dad, it's like, I'm getting really emotional, like just thinking about it, so, from there, that I am aware of, there has been at least one other experience that she has like legally died in the medical sense,
Yeah.
right? Like pale, blue lips, stopped breathing, that whole shebang, right? And it makes a person wonder, like, what is it going to take?
Yeah.
Right? But that is also not my decision to make, right? Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that, Rob. I know it's not easy for you to come down here and open up about this stuff because it is still ongoing and there's a lot of pain and in talking about it. That kind of and it for me it begs the question, like, because you've been pretty adamant about coming on here, and I really appreciate that. What
It's
is
my pleasure.
Like what makes you want to kind of do this and talk about it and open up and get vulnerable?
I think that there's maybe a few different reasons for that. I think that one is I find I had mentioned earlier about that, at one time I had worked in the film industry. I've always, all of my endeavors, whether they've been personal or professional, on some level have always had a level of creativity to them. And I find that, at the risk of sounding like pretentious or whatever, the artistic process, by thinking things through helps me.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. So, I promise, to anybody in my life, if you've ever, seen me like, talking to myself, I'm working something through. I'm not nuts, like I'm, like, well, what if I do this? And what if oh yeah, but this could be the best way for this to work out. And I find that it applies to a lot of facets of my life. Right. So I think that a lot of times, and, that I'm in a recovery program for, support of people who have addiction issues. And I find that going and listening and talking these things through and interacting with people, it is a huge boon to my own well-being and mental health.
Absolutely.
And then also, like I had said to you in one of our first interactions with one another, is that one thing that I have found and learned in my own recovery is that life is service, man.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that you probably feel the same way in doing the podcast, and everything else that you do with anything that has to do with your recovery. If I can help one person, if one person can hear my words, or understand my situation, and they can pull something from that, and it makes them say, maybe that'll work for me. I'm truly blessed to be able to do that.
Yeah,
it is legit my pleasure.
Absolutely. And a big part of that too, I get emotional just thinking about that too, because when I was in active addiction, I didn't even have that bone in my body to be able to do that. And when I cry like this, it's truly out of gratitude, because I wouldn't be here if everybody that came into recovery didn't think like that, right? I wouldn't be here if that first meeting I went to, which was like one of the scariest moments of my life, somebody hadn't come up to me and shook my hand and said, "Hey, we're happy you're here. Welcome, have a seat, grab a coffee. You're going to be okay." Right. I wouldn't be here if that didn't happen. So if I can do that and replicate that at even a 1/10 of a degree to somebody else, I've done my job. Right. And it's a truly a beautiful thing. I often say this recovery thing is like the pyramid scheme without the scheme. Right. And I talked about that in the beginning, this, in a negative connotation of this kind of butterfly effect of how the addict affects so many people. Now I just have to do that the other way around, man. Right. I just have to affect the butterfly effect, to, implement that in a positive way. And it doesn't have to be, I often say this, it doesn't have to be this like profound speech from a hilltop. In fact, that doesn't work in my experience. It's just simply me talking about what I went through, how I got through it, and my experience, strength, and hope, that maybe somebody else can say exactly what you said. I love that, is like, hey, maybe that'll work for me. Maybe it won't, but I'm going to open my mind and try it either way. So you're on your own healing journey right now. Mm-hmm. You talked about that a little bit. I think, in talking to my therapist, who's also in sobriety, she says, like, bar none, the hardest thing for her to do is to get the loved ones of addicts to go into their own recovery program. And there's like, well, why do I have to change? It's their fault, right? And that's,
Oh man, like I almost, with you saying that, I almost just like felt like a metaphorical punch in the stomach. If I have any regrets about the way that I have handled things with my kids' recovery, and when the severity of their issues came to the forefront with me, oh man, I know I gotta let this go. I know forgiveness is, and letting go and all variations of that kind of notion are very important to recovery. Not just recovery, but your own, personal journey in life as well too. But yeah. I remember, And then, subtopic, I should say as well too, that, a lot of, and this is where we started our conversation, a lot of support and what you find comes from being lucky enough to have people around you, that love you and they support you, and they want to do whatever it is that is going to, help bring you to a better place. I have a fabulous, fabulous partner in my life who has taken this journey with me as well too. I don't want to talk too much, because she has her own story. But she's one of those people who kind of makes everybody around her better, I'm recognizing that, excuse me, I'm very blessed in that regard. But one of the worst things that I have, experienced in my time, or that, as the severity of this situation was rearing its head, was that my oldest, she could see that I was really struggling with, like, how could you allow yourself, to get to this point, all of those bullshit, old-fashioned notions of, I didn't raise you to be this person, and we both know, as do a lot of people who are probably listening and watching and in recovery, one thing has nothing to do with the next, right? And she had seen that I was, really having trouble getting my head around a lot of this stuff. And she had said, maybe you might want to think about going to a meeting, right? Because there are meetings that exist for people who are affected by a loved one's addiction, right? And Anthony, I got to tell you, man, like, it's probably one of the most shameful moments of my life that I had said, listen, kid, you're the one with the problem. Yeah. It's not me, right? And, as you know, everything that I have just said in the last 20, 25 seconds, wrong, right? All a mistake, right? And, there's a lot of ego in addiction, and there's a lot of ego surrounding addiction. And, part of finding that is you have to strip yourself of a certain amount of it. I don't necessarily agree with the notion that you need to strip yourself of all your ego. It's certain breeds of ego that need to go. So
I think this idea of ego deflation entices me, right? It's like, it doesn't have to completely disappear, because some of it serves us, right? It drives us to be better. But there's certainly this overinflation of ego in addiction, and I hadn't thought about it like that. I'm happy that you brought that up, because ego does surround addiction too, right? There's this "I'm fine, you need to change" idea. So, and you answered it already, but there's, that moment seems to be the moment where you were like, maybe I have a part in this, right? I didn't cause it. I can't control it.
And I can't cure it.
Thank you. I can't cure it, but maybe I do have a part in this. So can you talk a little bit about, I guess, your part in it? Like, what is your part in it?
I don't know that I have a fully formed answer yet. We're all on our own journey of discovery. Because you go back and I think reflection is important. I think that regret is overrated. I just came up with that right now. That's not bad, eh? That's not bad.
I'm gonna clip that for sure.
Yeah, I might. I might hold on to that one. I might put that on a sticky pad. And, but it's one of those things where it's like, so, we've talked about a lot today, like even off mic, like as we were, just sort of like getting to know one another.
Yeah.
Not only am I like, a big movie guy, a big music guy, a big sports guy as well too. I still have a bone to pick with you and Caleb about the CFL. That'll be for another time.
Yeah.
But I'm lucky enough that I'm a season ticket holder to a couple of different sports franchises in this city, and there were times when I would bring my oldest to a game. My youngest, at this point in her life, really doesn't have a whole lot of interest, but my oldest, I would bring her to a game every once in a while, and it would be like, I would, buy her like a small, like 8-ounce beer, just be like, don't tell your mom, like that kind of thing. Like maybe it's 16, and like one, but then in retrospect, when you see how things have worked out, it's like, shit, did that moment that we were having, like, sort of a bonding, did I contribute to that?
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer to that is. But I think also, because my kids grew up in two different homes, no matter how hard you try and regulate that, there's always going to be some level of disjointed parenting. And I don't know if that helped. I know that it certainly wasn't intentional because I always remained hyper cognitive to, I want my kids' lives to be as normal as they possibly can, despite the fact that they live with their mom here and they live with me here.
Yeah.
Right. And, you do your best, right? You do your best. I know, like, so going back to music for a second, one of my guys is Springsteen, right? And he grew up with, at the time, an undiagnosed bipolar father.
Yeah.
Right. There's a movie about his life coming out in the fall, so I'm sure that they'll touch upon this. And his father, later in life, had received his diagnosis. He had received treatment. He had received medication. He got his condition under control. And his dad, later in his life, had a moment where he said, I was probably pretty hard on you growing up, son, And Bruce had said to him, Dad, you did the best that you could with the tools that you had at the time.
I love that. Yeah.
Right. And, not only does that show an amazing sense of forgiving, and of acceptance, but it's, yeah, I don't know how to end that.
No, you know what? And I want to clarify something too. I kind of posed that in a wrong way, that question. What I fully want people to understand, if anything, out of this whole entire episode, in the healing journey that you're on now, what is your part in healing from this? Because I really, and to answer your question, I think a lot of parents maybe do think that they contributed more to the addiction than they did. I want to tell you right now, and I'm sure you know this, but I want to confirm it. Nothing my parents did made me an addict at all. I was bound from day one. I fully believe that. I had an amazing household growing up. I had an amazing childhood. I had everything a kid needed, wanted, could have asked for. There was no abuse in my household. Nothing on paper should have contributed to the life that I ended up in, right? I was bound from day one, like I said. But I think that what I really believe in is that you have a problem here now, right? And I'm not saying that you have a problem. I'm just hypothetically, you're addict.
There's something on the table.
The person in your life is struggling with this, right?
Yes.
You have two choices. You can shame them to high hell and tell them to change and beat them into oblivion, or you can kind of take this other road, which you're clearly taking. And I noticed that from what my mom talks about you, but even just in talking to you, this acceptance that you mentioned. What is your part in the healing journey of this in your daughter's lives?
Yeah. So, Yeah. That's, you know, kind of like a, that's kind of like a Pandora's box question. One thing that I do know, and this is, you know, a thought process that I've gotten a lot of mileage out of, is that there is a prevalent belief that exists still within modern society. Everything that we know going through the opioid crisis, you know, alcoholism, you know, pick your poison. There is still, you know, a very incorrect belief system out there that says these people are choosing to do this. Right? That's like saying to somebody, hey, you know what? It's a real problem for me that you've got lupus. I need you to stop having lupus.
Yeah. It's really inconvenient for me. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And it's like, it isn't that easy, right? It's actually preposterous to look at it from that perspective. And until you're able to get your head around that concept, you are going to stay in neutral.
Love that.
Right? And that took me a long time to recognize that. I can certainly tell you a lot of the mistakes that I made in the beginning. So, you know, in an instance where, like, you know, a creditor was calling up and saying, you owe X amount of dollars because of an unpaid utility bill. You know, you're behind on this, you know, whatever. I was taking care of all of those things. Right. And it's like, you know, so another rule, for lack of a better term, that I have recognized in recovery is there's a lot of stuff that you're going to be asked to embrace that completely goes against every instinct that you have as a parent, right? Every single one, you know, it's like, you know, I was driving along in my neighborhood last week, and, you know, because of the time of year that it is, I saw a Canada goose that had just given birth to a whole nest of baby geese. And, you know, they're just like in the cartoons, like they're all walking in a row along a sidewalk, right? And somebody was trying to get past, I think, you know, to get to work or to get to the bus, you know, or something like that, right? And the mother just lost her shit, right? And I think that, you know, a lot of our instincts as parents, they go back to, like, you know, our more primitive roots, that it's like you see your child being threatened. If there's any perceived threat that is in their proximity, you want to go DEFCON 5 about this, right? Yeah. And a lot of the stuff that you learn in recovery is that you need to let those things go, right? Because in the long run, in a very ironic, sometimes cruel, but ultimately real way, you can't meddle, you can't get involved, because there is something on their journey that they need to find themselves, you know? I had been, you know, to one of my fellow travelers, you know, in recovery, I had been having a conversation a little while ago about, you know, a little despondency about how that my abilities to help, to foster a better path for my kid had been quite fruitless. And this person had said to me, you know, you maybe need to accept, Rob, that you are not meant to be the vessel to impart that wisdom in this section of her journey. And as a parent, that is a really, really jagged, bitter pill.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, you nailed it with that. I think letting go is so counterintuitive to parenting, right? And I don't have any kids, and I can't even begin to imagine what that's like. But I've seen my mom go through it, right? And she's talked about it openly. So I want to close with this. If there's one thing you could say right now to a parent that's struggling with their kid, or a loved one that's struggling with an addict in their life, what do you say?
I think that, maybe tying in with what it was that we were just talking about, and as hard as it is, and, for some people, this is unfortunately going to be an impossibility. You need to let go of the notion that you're the solution, right? This is bigger than you, and you're not a medical professional. You're not an addiction specialist, and do what you can. But you also need to set some healthy boundaries for yourself. That, there's something that I learned there was like a little fable, for lack of a better expression, that we learned very early in recovery about, the one about the parent and the child who were on a plane.
No.
And the oxygen masks dropped down.
Oh, yeah. That's a common one. Yeah. That's a good one.
So, for anybody who is watching or listening who doesn't know it, let's say, it's a movie scene, right? And there's a parent and a child, and they're sitting on a plane together. And for whatever reason, the oxygen masks go down. All the red lights start flashing in the plane. There's announcements that come over the PA system, saying that, we're experiencing this, put the mask on, Now, as a parent, or as a loved one in general, your natural, DNA bred instinct is, I need to get that mask on my kid right now, right? The problem is, though, that because of lack of oxygen that may happen as a result of decompression or the plane going down or whatever, you could pass out while you are fumbling to get that kid's mask on, right? Ergo, you're no good to anybody, right? Suddenly, the person who really relies upon you doesn't have you as a resource anymore, right? And they're left to fend for themselves. So you need to figure out, and every instance I believe is unique. You need to figure out what that moment is for you, right? And then maybe the last thing that I would tack on to that as well too, you need to find something for yourself that is going to give you some sense of a stability in your own thinking, right? Something positive. I want to be very clear on saying positive, whether it's, something as simple as, getting on an exercise bike for 20 minutes a day, good book. I know that this sounds really simple, but seriously, this stuff is important. Yeah. It really is. Yeah. You gotta, and I have also found that we have, sometimes a need for immediacy with whatever problem it is that comes up. And I have found that I have gotten a lot of mileage out of, this is important. I understand that this is important. I don't have the capacity in this exact moment that I can help you reason this through. Give me some time and I'll get back to you on it. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. Take care of yourself, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rob, for coming down here.
I appreciate it, man. And you know what? You and Caleb keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thank you. I learned a lot today, and I hope that one person did as well. Thank you, Rob.
You're the best, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Please help us grow the channel and like, share, and subscribe for more content. The discussions and stories shared on this podcast are for informational and motivational purposes only. This content is not a substitute for professional medical advice, addiction treatment, or therapy. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please consult a licensed physician, addiction specialist, or mental health professional. You are no longer alone.